From the Jack and Jones Stratter Studio in beautiful CCM at the University of Cincinnati, it's the Dennis Daniels Show. Tonight's guest, WWE Hall of Famer J.J. Dillon, and your announcer, me, Belldandy. And now, here's your host. He is the 2011 Bearcast Lifetime Achievement Award winner, Mr. Dennis Daniels.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of all ages, you've successfully navigated yourself to BearcastRadio.com's greatest talk show segment. I'm talking, of course, of the Dennis Daniels Show. I am your host. I am the 16th-season world champion of BearcastRadio.com and the BearcastRadio.com Lifetime Achievement Award winner for 2011, Dennis Daniel. And while this may not be a flair for the gold, give it up once again for my lovely announcer. She is the Fifi to my Ric Flair, Belldandy. Anyway, folks, I like to introduce my brother, John Pokemon. You know, he's like the Arn Anderson to my Tully Blanchard. Unfortunately, he could not be here with us tonight, but in his place is a good friend of mine. I've known him since high school. He's a huge wrestling fan. He is the owner of the Heartland Wrestling Alliance here in Cincinnati. Give it up, my good friend, Mr. Kris Ayers. Kris, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Denny. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I wouldn't have anybody else on except for John. And besides, you know a lot about the subject of tonight's interview. Because tonight on the Dennis Daniels Show, we have got none other than professional wrestling legend and WWE Hall of Famer, J.J. Dillon. Now, for those of you who don't know who J.J. Dillon is, J.J. Dillon is possibly best known as one of the greatest wrestling managers of all time. He has competed and worked for both the NWA, WCW, and even the WWE. And he is best known as the leader of possibly one of the greatest factions in professional wrestling. And we're not talking D-Generation X. We're not talking Evolution. We're not even talking the NWO. Even though that would be too sweet. I am talking of the original Four Horsemen. That consists of Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Barry Windham, and the 16-time world champion, the limousine driving, jet flying, wheeling dealing, kiss stealing, woo! Son of a gun! Nature Boy Ric Flair. Did I get that right?
Sounded right.
Yeah, sounded right. But anyway, Kris, what made the Four Horsemen such a big name in professional wrestling?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing you have to look at is the biggest thing with them was it wasn't just, one main guy and then three guys trying to make their name. It was four guys that were at the top of their game at one time, all together. Up until that point, you didn't have that. You normally, like I said, you had like one guy who was the big name, and then you had other guys that were with him that they tried to, basically use the guy's name to make their name. So out of necessity, as you figure out with all the history through them, they all had to do one segment, and it was born. Just like that. Natural chemistry. Most things in wrestling happen because out of nowhere, something needs to be done, and it just clicks.
Yeah. At the helm of all of that was J.J. Dillon, the brains behind the Horsemen, the jockey of the Horsemen, if you will. Is that kind of redundant, though, a jockey for a horseman?
No, somebody had to navigate that thing.
And I would not see anybody else other than J.J. Dillon, who not only had experience in the ring, but is also an accredited manager. He even managed guys like WWE Hall of Famer Abdullah the Butcher, Moondog Mayne, and the Mongolian Stomper. And he managed them to multiple championships in the NWA. So here's a guy who knows what he is doing. So at the time, who better to run the Four Horsemen than the guy who was like the Bobby Heenan of the NWA? I've got such respect for him because, as many of you know, I want to be a pro wrestling manager myself. And this guy has at least 3 decades of experience in both wrestling and managing. So, what better guy to have on the show than J.J. Dillon?
I agree. I'm very excited.
This is good. This is pretty cool. Again, like I said, he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame the night before WrestleMania, and alongside Ric Flair, Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson, and Barry Windham, the Four Horsemen took their rightful place in the Hall of Fame. Because we all know they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. Because not only did they live up to the hype in the ring, but out of the ring, they were giants. But anyway, let's get down to this. I'm excited. I got that natural high going on there. Are you ready, Kris?
I can see it in your face.
Oh, are you ready?
Let's do it.
My guest tonight is a professional wrestling icon and best known as the leader of the original Four Horsemen. He has over 3 decades of wrestling expertise, and hopefully we'll be able to pick some of those from his brain tonight in the interview. So, ladies and gentlemen, and I pray that I get this right, I give to you the original man behind the best faction in pro wrestling in history, the leader of the Four Horsemen, WWE Hall of Famer, Mr. James J. Dillon! Mr. Dillon, thank you, and welcome to the Dennis Daniels Show.
Dennis and Kris, happy to be on board. I mean, you got all the bells and whistles. I got the music in the intro, and I listened to the whole thing. And in the beginning, you said possibly one of the greatest, and then by the time you got all wound up, I think you conceded to the fact that we were the greatest faction ever. So I'm glad you kind of corrected yourself.
I've only got one thing to say to you, Mr. Dillon. I'm not worthy! I'm not worthy! I'm not worthy! Oh, I gotta say, this is truly a huge honor. I'm a big wrestling fan, and I don't think I can get any bigger than the man who led possibly, the greatest. We gotta clear that right now, Kris. The greatest wrestling faction in the history of the business. And to have you on here, I'm humbled. I'm ready to have a heart attack. I'm ready just to fall over. I'm shaking. I feel the pure electricity from you. It's just amazing that you actually offered to be on our show, and I have to bow because I'm not worthy.
Well, hey, I'm a big believer in the value of education, and when I saw that you were on the University of Cincinnati's Student Internet Radio Network, I thought, okay, this is and not that I'm overly selective with the interviews that I do, but that caught my attention, and I have twins that are currently freshmen biomedical engineering majors here in Delaware, where I live at the University of Delaware. So I'm very in tune with education and how important it is. So the fact that you're on that network, you got some extra points with me before we ever got started.
Oh, and I'm sure Bearcast Radio will love hearing that at the General Body meeting next time, Mr. Dillon. This is again a truly huge honor for someone who has seen so much in the history of professional wrestling, so much develop, so much happen. And of course, we'll get into that a little bit later on in the show. So what got you interested in professional wrestling?
I think is the case with a lot of people that come into the business. Not everybody, but a lot of them. I started as a fan. I just was a teenager in New Jersey and discovered professional wrestling at a time when it was far different than it is today. There weren't as many stations on the air to choose from. In fact, wrestling was only on one night live for an hour and a half on Thursday nights, and I just was overwhelmed by the cast of characters and back in those days, I mean, we're talking about the middle to late 50s, so we're talking about a half century ago. But there was Chief Bigheart with the Indian headdress, and Karl von Hess, the German with tattoos all over, and Skull Murphy with the shaved head, and Dr. Jerry Graham and Eddie Graham that had the bleached blonde hair. And you know, nowadays you didn't not only have to go to Times Square. I mean, you could go to any main street in this country, and I think you'll see bizarre characters that wouldn't even turn a head. But half a century ago, they were bigger than life characters, and I just decided very early on that was my dream, and that I was going to pursue it.
Honestly, I could not see you anywhere else, Mr. Dillon. Just what you've done for pro wrestling, it stood the test of time. Everyone who was a wrestling fan, you know, growing up, watching you and, of course, the other Horsemen on whether it was NWA or WCW or even being inducted into the Hall of Fame, everybody knows who the Four Horsemen are and what they did for pro wrestling. So, and to be a fan, not knowing that you're going to have an impact on the business, that has to be mind-blowing.
Well, in the beginning, it was just a matter of chasing my dream and wanting to get my foot in the door. And like you say, no idea, you know, where it was going to go, if in fact it was going to happen. And I've often said, and it's true, that I was never blessed with a power physique like a Hulk Hogan or a Lex Luger or an Ultimate Warrior or a superstar Billy Graham. And, you know, probably not the most talented, but nobody wanted it more than I did or was willing to work any harder than I was. And then beyond that, you know, being able to overcome, which happens in any endeavor in life, you know, the bumps in the road along the way and the disappointments, you know, just being able to persevere. And then a lot of it from that point is luck to a degree, being in the right place at the right time, and also having a lot of help along the way from a lot of people. So I had all of those things, and then, you know, these things just unfolded, and it was something that built, and it was all said and done. As you know, as I look back, I mean, I had a storybook career. I had a dream and was able to live it.
BearcastRadio.com. This is the Dennis Daniels Show. We've got WWE Hall of Famer J.J. Dillon, the leader of the original Four Horsemen of professional wrestling, on the air. Now, did you have any kind of special training to become a professional wrestler?
Not really. In fact, hadn't even seen an amateur match in high school in New Jersey. At that point, they didn't have an amateur program. I don't know if somebody gotten hurt seriously, and the wrestling program in the statewide didn't exist. So in high school, I played judo, which served me well later on because I was familiar with how to you know, take falls and be able to protect myself from serious injury. And then most of everything that I really learned to give me a foundation was learned in the role of a referee, where I was the third man in the ring for the era of the great champion Bruno Sammartino, and refereed many of his major championship matches in major arenas on the East Coast. So being that close to the action, seeing people that were the best in the business at that time, and being able at the core of it in the ring to kind of feel the emotion of the crowd and how what they did responded to it. I was like a sponge, just taking in all that knowledge that helped me later on.
For our fans who don't know, Mr. Dillon got his start as a referee in the then Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and of course refereed matches with, of course, the great Bruno Sammartino. But you made your professional wrestling debut on December 6, 1968, up a little bit past Dayton, and it was in a tag team attraction between Ron and Kris Dupree, who are known as Hell's Angels. What was going through your mind during your debut match?
Wow, I actually, the first match, I don't know that I have a copy of it, but somewhere out there in the YouTube universe is copies of a match that I had the 2 days later against the same Hell's Angel with Arnold Skolin, who's a WWE Hall of Famer, as my tag partner, or I was his tag partner. Stand corrected. And as you know, as I look back, I mean, it's obvious. You know, all of the giveaways to anybody that's seasoned in anything they do, especially in wrestling, about somebody who's very young, very inexperienced, very nervous, constantly fidgeting with their tights and adjusting and that kind of thing. So as I look back, it's hard going back that far to remember exactly what was going through my mind. And I think a lot of it was, you have to crawl before you walk before you run, what have you. And this was my crawling stage into the world of professional wrestling beyond the realm of referee, which at a time I thought, maybe that's as far as my dream was going to carry me. But the original Sheik, who promoted throughout Ohio and Michigan, had come east for a series of matches with Sammartino, and just in casual conversation in the dressing room told him that had been my dream. And he said, well, man, you come out, and I'll give you a chance. And I didn't know you can work for me, is I think how he phrased it. And I didn't know if he meant come out there and be a referee, because I was respected as a referee because I had a passion for the business. So a lot of the commission referees were just there as a political favor to somebody, and to get a payday, and really not into the business as such. So, but no, he said, come on out and wrestle. And my first night was there in Dayton, Ohio. And I know without specifically remembering, and again, it was a small studio, just chairs on two sides of the ring. And I think they only had like 2 rows. And oddly enough, the commentator calling the match was a guy named Ernie Roth, who was better known later on and a Hall of Famer as well, the Grand Wizard.
Wow. Now, the Grand Wizard of Wrestling, he was truly something else. Didn't he manage Sergeant Slaughter?
And he managed the original Sheik. That was where he was best known. And then he had a series of people, and I think he did manage Slaughter in the WWF later on.
Yeah, it must be so cool to have worked for the original Sheik. I bet you, if you crossed him, he would have shot a fireball in your eye, or he would have been on your head.
I remember sitting in an arena in Philadelphia as a fan, watching Argentina Rocca, who was a legend going back years before Bruno Sammartino. Had a tremendous following, was very loved. He was Italian descent from Argentina, and he wrestled the Sheik. And I had an old 8mm movie camera. No sound, of course, back in those days, but Rocco used to use the backbreaker, and he got the Sheik up in the backbreaker, and before he would submit, all of a sudden, here come this big ball of fire right down across Rocca's face, and he dropped him, and the Sheik was disqualified. So I have very vivid memories of the Sheik and the dreaded fireball.
We have to get that on YouTube. Kris. We have to. Do you still have it? We have to get that on YouTube. People would pay to see that.
Boy, that's a good. I have so much stuff, and I put things in a Foot Locker that, unfortunately, I don't get in there as often as I should and actually see what I have and what I don't have. But I do have a vivid recollection of actually filming that match. I mean, certain things, even as a fan, way back talking about, half a century ago, I was so into the business at that time that something like that is just burned in my memory.
Yeah, and we're talking with Kris here. He runs the Heartland Wrestling Alliance, which is a small wrestling organization here in Cincinnati. And Kris, I bet you record your fair share of memorable moments.
You don't really know they're memorable at the time. That's the funniest part about it. I'm sure that Mr. Dillon agrees that at the time it's just experiences. You go through, it happens, you don't really think about it, and then a few years later somebody throws it off and says, hey, you remember that one time? And then that's, when it becomes, and there's also plenty of times where you don't record it and it becomes a memory and you really kick yourself for it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And even though the run of the Horsemen was almost a quarter century ago, we were leaders in innovative approaches to everything. The scene that we taped where we assaulted Dusty Rhodes in the parking lot, I still have fans to this day that talk about that, and the impact that it had at that time paid dividends for direct dividends for almost a year, and people still remember that today.
of course, you've traveled around the globe, of course, wrestling, and you even spent a small amount of time wrestling in Japan in 1974. When we interviewed the World Warrior Low Ki on our show last year, he talked about wrestling being a highly respected event in many of their bigger venues, like the Tokyo Dome. What was it like to compete in front of a Japanese crowd as compared to what it would be like today?
Well, it was very different because the Japanese culture is one of being very reserved. You didn't have the intensity in the crowd with them cheering and really getting emotionally involved in a match. The Japanese would sit there and at the end of a very good match, they would politely applaud. So that was a little bit of a departure from what I was accustomed to. But as Low Ki said, and it's true, if you were a professional wrestler and you wrestled in Japan and were at the level to be over there on a tour, you commanded respect, and that was that was a good thing. And that was when I originally started in the business and realized that I finally had made that first step. I then remember 3 criteria that I thought, well, before I will ever actually, in my own mind, say that I made it in the business, 3 things that have to happen. Number 1 was touring Japan, because all of the greats did go to Japan, and at that time, the original person who brought professional wrestling to Japan was a guy named Ricky Dozan, who was part Korean, part Japanese, and he brought the early Americans over there and wrestled the Sensational Destroyer in a live match that held records for viewership. For the rating was phenomenal. I think virtually everybody in Japan watched it for a 1 hour, what was a legitimate fight, it seemed, between the two of them. But I thought I need to go to Japan, and at that point, Giant Baba had All Japan Pro Wrestling, and the Great Inoki had New Japan. And I ended up working for the Funks in Amarillo, West Texas territory, and they had a working agreement with Baba to furnish talent. So that's how I was able to get over there on my first tour. And in 1974, I went for 6 weeks. But again, you talk about dreams. And I know I have some black and white footage that I shot of the first tour that I went over, as we were riding on the bullet train, and I was in awe of Mount Fuji, of just all of the things that were so different over there with the Japanese culture. And on that tour, I've got a shot in my mind standing on a train platform waiting for the bullet train to come in, and on that tour was Dory Funk Jr., who was the reigning world champion at that time, Terry Funk, his brother, Harley Race, Jack Briscoe, Jerry Briscoe, all on the same tour, and I was there with him. So you talk about a goosebump moment where you pinch yourself and say, is this really happening? When you look back at the history of our profession, and you talk about the who's who, every one of those names is on that list. And on the other side, of course, Giant Baba had come to America when I was a kid, and I'd seen him in Madison Square Garden, and on the tour, dressing on the Japanese side, was the Destroyer, Dick Beyer, who was like a god over there as well.
We have to find that footage, Kris. We got to find that footage. That's some great crackerjack footage. We need to share with the others. It must be truly that amazing.
I mean, before he said it, I was going to say, it sounds like a who's train.
That was one step, and the other was to go to Australia, because that was another hotbed internationally. And then the third thing, of course, was as a kid, I had gone to Madison Square Garden, and there may be larger arenas, newer arenas, fancier arenas, but if you say to any wrestling fan, if you just say the Garden, and there is a Boston Garden, there's a Cincinnati Garden. There's gardens in other places, but when you say the Garden to the wrestling fan, everybody knows instantly what you're talking about. Of course, you're talking about Madison Square Garden, and so that was the last step, that if I someday could be wrestling in Madison Square Garden, then okay. If I've been to Japan, been to Australia, and appeared in Madison Square Garden, okay, I've checked off my bucket list, if you want to call it that, and I can, in my own mind, say that, hey, I made a name for myself in the business.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Madison Square Garden, that actually leads us into our next question.
We have down here, when you made your Garden debut, you wrestled Tito Santana. What was it like, one, competing in the Garden for the first time, and two, knowing that you were in there with such a high-caliber athlete like Tito Santana?
At that time, I was kind of late in my career. We're talking about 1984, so you can do the math and figure. And I started full time in the profession as a wrestler in 1971, and I wrestled full time before I ever managed for almost 5 years. And unless you're a historian of the business or have read my autobiography, you probably wouldn't know that I had over 3,200 and some professional matches in my career, even though I'm best remembered as the leader of the Four Horsemen. But I, late in my career, was working in the office in Florida for Eddie Graham, again, going back to Dr. Jerry and Eddie Graham. And Eddie was, I think, my mentor, probably someone who had more influence on me in terms of the psychology of how a wrestling match should unfold, and in terms of physical toughness, there wasn't anybody tougher than Eddie Graham. And he had maybe a seventh grade education, but he was a genius in terms of psychology and what have you. But in a casual conversation with him, and I don't even remember how it came up, but it was like, well, I'd seen Eddie as a kid in the Garden in New York, and it was my dream maybe someday to say that I could wrestle there too. And now here I was in Florida, kind of late in my career, and at that point I'd be 42 years old, having started at months after my 29th birthday full time, and the likelihood of me getting to Madison Square Garden seemed very remote at that point. And Eddie told me that he said, why don't I give Vince McMahon a call? And I said, hey, I can. I couldn't ask you to do that. And he kind of laughed and never said anything else. Well, Vince McMahon Sr. was very, very beloved and respected throughout the wrestling industry. He was really a true gentleman and a wonderful human being. And he contracted, he was a heavy smoker and had lung cancer and was not doing well at that point. And his son had basically stepped up, Vince Jr., and was, making his mark, but that hadn't really fully happened yet. And a day or two went by, and I went into the office in Florida, and Eddie said, whatever the date was, April 23rd, he said, you're booked in the Garden. He said, they're going to fly you up from here, and you'll have your match and fly you back. And oh, gee, I was at a loss for words. That this was like the last piece of the puzzle of my dream coming true, and I had said that I wanted to call Vince Sr. and thank him, which I did, and he was always very kind to me when I started as a referee. I was in college at the time, and really a nobody, and he knew me on my name basis to talk to me, and always said hello, and always was very gracious to me, and was very kind on the phone, and said that I'm very happy to be able to do this for you. And as it worked out, there were a lot of wrestlers who used to get booked as kind of a political favor, like, when the Von Erichs wanted to expand out of Texas and make a national name for himself. A lot of the stars, and from Japan as well, would get booked so that they could say, well, they wrestled in Madison Square Garden, and kind of added to their resume. And I didn't realize it till years later, but I was actually the last person to come in as what might be called a quote-unquote political failure or favor, because after that, the feelings between Vince McMahon Jr. and the rest of the wrestling community became very hostile, because he was going everywhere and taking over everybody's TV, and the old kind of like boundaries of the regional territories that everybody respected for years were now erased, because cable television changed all that. And Vince was the first one to go with a national show, and He put his television program in every individual market and paid for it, where it used to be a barter deal and didn't cost the local promoter anything other than production cost. And so anyway, I was the last person to come in as a favor. So when you talk about, again, a storybook career, I just was incredibly lucky and just amazing the good fortune that I had.
So I guess one thing that should be on every pro wrestler's or even a wrestling fan's bucket list is to go to the Garden. And for a wrestler, is to compete at the Garden.
Absolutely, and I have. The program was sold out, and someone gave me a copy of the program insert that I was able to make a copy of, and we've lost so many of the great talent over the years, but I have it framed here on the wall with a picture of Tito and I. And actually, that night I just was on the card. If you looked at the original program, Tito was due to defend the Intercontinental title against one of the Samoans. And that night, because of the Garden Network, and here I was coming in from another territory, and could be a sacrificial lamb, so to speak, for Tito Santana for the Garden Network without having to sacrifice one of the Samoans. So the main event that night was Sergeant Slaughter that you mentioned earlier against the Iron Sheik, and Greg the Hammer Valentine faced Bob Backlund, and then I was in the Intercontinental title match against Tito Santana, and there was a great six-man on the card. Rowdy Roddy Piper, Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful, and Dr. D. David Schultz against USA Tony Atlas, Rocky Johnson, who's the father of The Rock, and Polish Power Ivan Putski. And Wendy Richter was there that night. So I've had everybody that was there autograph that program insert, and I have it framed on the wall, and that's one of my treasured possessions.
That's got to be worth at least, what, $5,000? That's got to be.
It's priceless to me. It might not be worth a whole lot to somebody else, but just the fact that everybody's still here and that I was able to get it signed, and just to preserve that memory, and also because the Garden Network was recording all the events at that time, which the Garden Network then ceased to exist. So there was actually. Again, you can go to YouTube and find a copy of that match that was, I think, 8 or 9 minutes long, and the commentary was Pat Patterson and I want to say Gorilla Monsoon, and they talked about everything but the match because to the fans of the traditional Garden Network, coming from Florida like that for one shot, I was not a household word, a household name as I was fortunate to become later on. So I have copies of that match of the only time I ever appeared in the Garden.
Hey, don't be ashamed of treasuring that autograph page, Mr. Dillon. You want to talk about fandom? This guy next to me, he's got to be the craziest guy I ever know. Tell him, Kris, what you did to show your true love for pro wrestling.
I'm not quite sure which one you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. Talking about when you met Hulk Hogan.
Oh, I was lucky enough last year to meet Hulk Hogan for the first time in my 24 years of fandom, and I had him autograph my leg, and I went and got it tattooed.
So he now has...
Wow, that's the ultimate tribute.
He now has the tattoo autographed on his right leg.
Wow.
He won't be the only one if I have my ways. He won't be the only one on there.
When you're in the profession, I guess it's kind of like anything else. And you're doing business with these legends on a day-to-day basis, you don't think of the significance of that moment. And I didn't save a lot of things for over the years, or get a lot of a lot of candid photos for my own use. But I have one picture up here. The WWF did a venture in Japan that was kind of laying the foundation for them eventually going over there on a regular basis. And I'm in a memorabilia store with a bunch of Japanese people who I don't know who they are, but in the picture are Earthquake John Tenta, who has passed away, of course, Hulk Hogan in the middle, and off to the right is the Macho Man Randy Savage, and all three of them autographed that picture for me, and that's, again, another one of my prized possessions, and I have mounted over here 3 pictures. One I have that was that I had taken with Bruno Sammartino that he personalized and signed for me. I have another one with Hulk Hogan that he personalized and signed for me, and of course one with the Nature Boy. So 3 of the greatest champions in the history of our profession, side by side by side. So I've later on, learned that when you have a moment, I've got a picture here with Roddy Piper, who was someone I was very close to over the years, and just at Cauliflower Alley a couple of years ago, Stone Cold came back and had an impromptu picture taken with him, and then a year later went back and he came again and had him sign it, and so I got some great memories preserved here.
Pardon me one second, Dillon. I think I'm going to go cry tears of awesomeness. Oh, gosh, that is so awesome. BearcastRadio.com. This is the Dennis Daniels Show. We've got J.J. Dillon, the original leader of the Four Horsemen of professional wrestling. You would later go on from wrestling to managing, winning Pro Wrestling Illustrated's Manager of the Year 3 times, once in 82, once in 83, and once in 88. And you managed several champions to multiple titles, including WWE Hall of Famer Abdullah the Butcher, Moondog Mayne, and the Mongolian Stomper. What was the transition from wrestler to manager like, and do you prefer one over the other?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm looking at the plaques. I still have them after all these years. And also in 1988, there was another major publication called the Main Event that picked the Manager of the Year, George Napolitano, who took pictures and was very active. And you still see George come around. They as well named me Manager of the Year in 1988. But as I said, I started as a wrestler, and I met the Mongolian Stomper up in the Canadian Maritimes, where I got my first break in the summer of around '73. And then from there I went to Amarillo for a year, which is where I made 2 tours of Japan, and from there went to Florida, which is where I had always wanted to go, just to work for Eddie Graham. And when I got to Florida, the Mongolian Stomper was working there, so I had a chance to wrestle him. In Florida, we had actually been tag partners a few times, and I had a run there as a Florida tag team champion with Roger Kirby, and also I was a Florida heavyweight champion, having taken the title from Mr. Wrestling 2, and then later lost it back to him. So, I was fortunate enough to hold some major regional titles, but that year. The Stomper left and went to Tennessee with Bearcat Wright, who was another legendary name, and Bearcat was going to be his manager, and I guess it was 2 very strong personalities, and it was not a match made in heaven. It didn't last very long, and I, in 1975, just got a call out of the blue from Stomper, and told me that things hadn't gone well with Bearcat after he left Florida, and that he needed to make a move from Tennessee, and that there was a main event spot open in Dallas, and that he wanted to go but needed a manager, and asked me if I'd ever given any thought to managing, which I hadn't. And he said, well, it's a top spot, and he had heard my interviews and from the Canadian Maritimes and from Florida, and he said, I think you'd make a great manager, and we'd make a good combination. And so they say how, one door closes behind you as another opens in front of you, and that's kind of what it was. And it was a smooth transition for me in that, again, as I said earlier, I was not blessed with this powerful physique. My greatest strength, I think, always was my interviews. And so it was a natural thing, if as a manager, to be the spokesperson for somebody, to be doing something that focused on my greatest strengths. So that opened the door for me to managing, and never looked back from there.
Let me just go ahead, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to read some of your accomplishments as a pro wrestler, just so we can give the audience a perspective. Central States Wrestling, the NWA Central States Tag Team Champion, one time with Buzz Tyler. The Championship Wrestling from Florida, the NWA Florida Heavyweight Championship, the NWA Florida Tag Team Championship with Roger Kirby, the NWA Florida Television Championship. From the Eastern Sports Association, the ESA International Heavyweight Champion, the ESA International Tag Team Champion, one time with Freddie Sutan, the ESA North American Heavyweight Champion, the NWA Western States, the NWA International Heavyweight Championship, our media version one time, the NWA Western States Television Championship. You were the NWA Macon Heavyweight Champion.
Macon, that was me. I was the city champion in Macon.
Macon.
Yeah, that's down towards the bottom of the list of significant accomplishments. But obviously you've done your homework, and the thing is that it's kind of like a snowball effect. Because I was a fan. When I got an opportunity that was it was a chance thing, where I was going down to Philadelphia to help while I was in college with a guy that actually set the ring up for a weekly studio show, and they had a terrible blizzard hit there one night, and none of the commission referees showed up, and they had enough wrestlers to tape the hour of programming. I think it was like on a Wednesday night that aired on Saturday, and looking for a referee, and they all looked at me and they said, can you referee? And yes, and so. That was my few moments of fame. I was the only referee for that hour and did a good job. And they said, well, you should be doing this all the time. You're very good. So the fact that I was a fan enabled me to be the best referee that I could, and then eventually elevated myself to being in the ring for many of Bruno's championship matches. And again, that was a wealth of knowledge that once I, actually had my chance to wrestle, I had all of that knowledge to fall back on, and then I was, I was a heel, I was a babyface, I was in the opening matches, moved up the card. So when I became a manager, I had this wealth of information and wealth of experience to fall back on. So as a fan, it made me a better referee. As a referee, it made me a better wrestler. As a wrestler, it made me a better manager. And like I said, a lot of it from that point was being in the right place at the right time, having some luck, and having a lot of wonderful people. And to start listing the names would be near impossible. But starting with Bruno Sammartino and just going right down the line of all the people in the original Sheik and Eddie Graham that helped me. That was the nice thing about doing my book. I was originally approached by Scott Teal, who had done Ole Anderson's autobiography, and a mutual friend introduced us, and he asked me about writing my life story. And at that point, I, which is typical in the wrestling business, had gone through my third divorce, and WCW had gone out of business, and for all practical purposes, my active wrestling career was over, and I didn't give any thought to writing a book. And I had children when I was working in the front offices of the WWE late in life. I had twins when I was 50, and then I had another daughter 2 years after that. And they came into the world after I had retired from the ring. And so I thought, if I could talk about my whole journey from day one and all these things that have happened to me and all the people that helped me, it would be great to do, not to make money, because I don't know that you can make money writing a book, but just to be able to document it all so that as time passed, that my children could always look back and have an understanding of what I did for so much of my adult life. So that's how the book came about. I'm very proud of it. Not available in bookstores. You got to go to jjdillon.com, and it was published by Scott Teal, my co-author, who has the Crowbar Press, and he's done a lot of other books after Ole and mine. He did Stan Hansen and Ivan Koloff and Tony Atlas, but he's a very respected historian. He's a great author, and basically took my life story and put it to print in a way that's a great read. And because my career was so lengthy, 40-some years, spanning 5 decades, that it's kind of like the history of modern wrestling, with all the changes from the territory days to how cable television impacted everything, to how it came down to basically, Vince McMahon and what was then the WWF, to Ted Turner's WCW, and then eventually, they fell by the wayside. And from the unique perspective of someone that was behind the scenes on the inside through all this. So it's a great history lesson. It's also history 101 or a wrestling 101 of how the business was structured. And even if you're not a wrestling fan, it's a feel-good story about a kid that had a dream and was able to live that dream.
It's wrestlers are like seagulls from McMahon to McMahon, and it's the personalized story of one of wrestling's greatest managing personalities. And if you go to jjdillon.com, which we'll link to on the Altice Explosion website, you can actually get an autographed copy with a special message from you, Mr. Dillon, at no extra charge.
Yeah, it started out when the book was first published that I wanted to kind of show my appreciation since the decision was made to do a limited printing. It's a hardback book. It's like 360-some pages with tons of pictures. And just the people that went to the trouble to get it, and at some of the appearances I early on would have it available. And I just started out signing copies, and there's a unique message the way that I sign it. And, of course, I've recently added WWE Hall of Fame 2012 at the bottom of that as well. But it started as a temporary thing, and it just is something that I've continued to do to this day. So it was published in 2005, so here we are, 2012, and anybody that goes to the trouble, and this is not about selling books, but if you go on there, you can find out what the chapter headings are about and some of the information. But if you just go to the comments of people who have gotten the book, and it's people in the business, it's people who are historians, it's fans, it's the people that take the time to get the book, read it, and then share their what their thoughts are. And I think that does more to tell you what the book is all about than if we talked about it for an hour, which of course I'm not going to do.
So wait. So you're telling me not only can I get an awesome book about what it was like behind the scenes with the Four Horsemen, working with WCW, and your career, I can also get it autographed? All of this for $24.95?
Yeah, absolutely. We rounded off to $25, so I guess maybe the signature costs you a nickel if you want to look at it that way. But it's and I've told people, I said, if you get the book and if you get it and feel that it wasn't worth the $25, send it back and I'll buy it back from you. And I think the original publication was a little over 3,000 copies, and I think there might be 500-600 left at this point, and nobody has sent me their copy back yet. So I think that says a lot about how well it's been received for those that have gotten it. I recently did an interview with all the publicity about the Hall of Fame. I had someone in Italy that had a website that sent me questions and then translated them into Italian and sent me the copy. It makes me look very brilliant because it's all in Italian, but I just received the first order from Italy of somebody who wanted the book personalized to them, and as a lifetime Horseman fan.
Well, Mr. Dillon, if you find someone that decides to send it back and want their money back, you call me, and I will fly over there, and I will kick that guy square in the nuts. I will not. Let me repeat that, Kris. I will not let someone return that book after this man, who has been in the business for over 4 decades, decide to give it back because it wasn't worth his money. I'll give him a punch in the nose. That'll be worth $25.
And like I say in the beginning, my motive was to create a story of my life to pass on to my children, and I have been very pleasantly surprised that people who from all over the world, who people all throughout Europe, Japan, virtually every state in the United States, throughout Canada, and it's amazing how someone will read the book and there's something in there, because there's like a chapter about how I got my break in the Maritimes, and I remember somebody up there that remembered me as a young kid during that time, and how that still stuck in their mind, those memories. And so the people that write, that share their thoughts with me, it's been very gratifying, and that was something that I never thought about when I first wrote the book. And just the fact that as you get older, and you often say to yourself, well, what did I do productive with my life? And in the wrestling business, you're in many ways an entertainer, and you think, wow, what did I certainly didn't discover the cure for cancer, and I was not a statesman, or and yet the messages and the feedback that I've gotten of how I touch people's lives, it really gave me a sense that what I did, had meaning. That if after all these years that they have these memories and share with me their thoughts, it really, as I look back, again, a storybook career, but something that was, very, very worthwhile to a lot of people to bring some joy, because I don't care what era you go. I mean, right now these are tough times, economic, and a lot of people out of work, and there were, some of the best times for wrestling were back during the Depression days, because people have always needed an escape from their day-to-day problems, and wrestling was, it was the basic. It's a confrontation, man on man. Without helmets and shoulder pads. I mean, they're out there one-on-one. And, of course, professional wrestling is unique because of the stories that we tell and the raw emotions. And, yes, there's violence, but it's a controlled violence. And it's just all the things that drew me as a fan when I was a kid are still what I love about professional wrestling. And to have done that and touched people's lives, too, that was a part that just gave it added meaning to me.
I mean, that's one of those things where, sitting here, I'm listening along, and, to hear that your story from being a fan to being in the business, it's kind of, I've nowhere even close or will ever come close to what you've achieved. But to hear that, it's kind of a similar story of fandom to, doing whatever you can to get in. So this really kind of touches home to me.
When my book first came out, and you can probably relate to this too, because it's like when you first break into the business, you don't make a big point in the locker room of saying, hey, I was a fan. I sat, many of the guys that I wrestled in those early years, Haystacks Calhoun and Bobo Brazil and the Sheik and Hans Schmidt and Wild Bull Curry, and just going down the names. These were people that I watched on television, and then was in the ring as a referee, and then had a chance to wrestle them. And it's like, you're so thrilled that you finally made it to that level that a lot of times in the dressing room, people have no idea of the individual background of the other people that are sitting there. And it was only after my book was published, and one of the early messages that I got was from Paul Bearer, who was Percy Pringle before that, and his name is Bill Moody, and a great success story as a manager. But he said, I read your story, and he said, I was amazed at the similarities of how we broke into the business and of our backgrounds. And he said, I never knew that. And his was much like that too. So, Kris, there's a lot of people who got into the business that are in the dressing room that if you knew the history of everybody sitting there, you might be amazed how a lot of guys, got started.
I mean, yeah, that's the one thing is, you're always learning from people. My good friend Dennis here has made no secret about it, that he would love to be one day a professional wrestling manager, and I've dabbled a little bit in it. He's asked me time and time again, and I think this is the perfect time. I think we found the person, Dennis. We found the person that you can ask, what are the secrets, and any advice that you can give to my friend Dennis on how to do this.
Well, I think the advice would be the same as anybody who wants to even, start a career in wrestling. That unfortunately the opportunities, in terms of number of opportunities, are few compared to when I broke into the business. But for those that persevere and make it, also the rewards are the monetary rewards, particularly, and the fact that if you're on top now with the WWE, you're truly part of an international brand that goes everywhere in the world. I mean, they're in South America now. But from a managerial perspective, it's changed. I mean, everything changes in life, and wrestling is no different. And not necessarily is all change necessarily for the good, but change is inevitable in everything, wrestling included. And back when I started, you nowadays don't have the bizarre characters that existed when I broke in. The Sheik being one, Abdullah the Butcher being another, the Stomper being another. There was a mystique of these guys, just this mental picture that was created by seeing them on your screen or seeing them live in your arena without ever hearing from them. And you didn't know if inside there was some kind of a wild man or what. And so it was the perfect role to have a manager to be the spokesperson and to facilitate the telling of the stories and the different things that happen. Nowadays, they don't exist anymore, and yet when you think that it's all over and the opportunity for a good manager doesn't exist anymore, just look what's happened with Brock Lesnar. He's come in and made a huge name for himself, and he's going to have a phenomenal run, I'm sure, for a year or two. And the situation is such that contractually they have limited dates that they could use him, and who emerges but Paulie Dangerously, Paul Heyman, who's one of the great minds in our business and a great manager, who now steps forward as his manager and spokesperson for him. So here in the year 2012 is a perfect role for the wrestling manager, and there's nobody that will do it any better than he will, Paulie.
Oh, gosh, that is kind of daunting, but I think, and this might be just that young, pretentious crap talking, Mr. Dillon, but I think I have what it takes to bring nobility and respect back to the managerial position in professional wrestling. I mean, look at the competition besides Paul Heyman. No offense to Paul Heyman, but you got Vicky Guerrero, who screams half of her stuff all the time. She manages two mid-carders like Dolph Ziggler and Jack Swagger, which, they have all the potential in the world, but they don't utilize Vicky properly. Sure, she goes, "Excuse me!" But that's what else is there beside that? There's nothing. You don't see her.
That's the fingernails on the chalkboard that just goes up one side of you and down the other.
I mean, with Bobby Heenan, at least he got involved. He would pick up his guy's foot and put it on the rope and point to it before the ref got to the 3 count. He would smack a wrestler. Vicky all she does is just go out there and talk and nothing. There is no essence. At least with guys like Jimmy Hart and Mr. Fuji, they got a weapon involved to give their guys wins. All you see her is just screaming, and even that's getting repetitive. So I think if I can find the right gimmick, I could bring some nobility and respect and popularity back to the managerial position in professional wrestling.
Hey, chase your dream. And you have brought up, the name of Bobby the Brain Heenan, and I will say with all humility that he's the greatest manager that ever lived, and he's the one that set the bar by which all the rest of us are measured. And Bobby could do it all. He was, and that's the thing about managing too. Everybody's style was different. Bobby's style was one way. My style was different. Paul Ellering was different. Mouth to South Jimmy Hart. Freddie Blast. You look at all the managers. There is no cookie cutter way of saying this is what a manager should do. This is what he should look like. This is how he should act. And each of the names and Playboy Gary Hart that we've lost, and Sir Oliver Humperdinck, they were all very, 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 very successful managers, and yet very individual in their own style and their own presentation. And just you have to come up with something that, and again, it's the right chemistry with the right wrestling talent, and then you've got to be someone a character who, whatever your presentation is, that you're personally comfortable with, whether it's an extension of your true personality or whether it's a character that you live vicariously through, whatever it happens to be. But like I say, with Paul Heyman, you would have thought the role of the wrestling manager is dead, and here it is. It's suddenly been revived, and as my career shows, anything in this business is possible.
Yes, I don't think anyone can top Bobby Heenan, Mr. Dillon. And of course, no offense to you, but the guy he had a viper-like tongue. It was just so amazing. I think one of my favorite lines from him was, "A friend in need is a pest." I love that line so much. He didn't even say that in wrestling, but that was just so funny. He has this wit about him that's unmatchable.
And when he and Gorilla Monsoon were commentators, to me, they were one of the greatest combinations, that ever was. They complemented each other beautifully, and Bobby has had some terrible health issues. I saw him a couple times within the last year. He's hardly able to speak anymore, and has had cancer has ravaged his body, but that twinkle in the eye is still there, and that sense of humor is still there, and it's every time that I get a chance to see Bobby, it's a treasured moment.
We would love to have Bobby Heenan on the show. Of course, it wouldn't be a very long interview, but still, just to be able to talk with one of the greats out there, it would be truly amazing. I don't care what it would take. I would cut my left arm off just to be able to talk to Bobby Heenan, because the guy is, oh gosh, I think I share so much in common with him. I know I could talk 1,000 miles a day. I could talk on and on and on and on about myself, be a narcissistic SOB, and I don't care, because Bobby Heenan made that cool.
One of the greatest compliments that I ever, with Nick Bockwinkel, who was very, very respected. He was AWA champion, and he had a tremendous run up in the Minneapolis territory with Ray Stevens as a tag team combination, and they were managed by Bobby Heenan. And if there was a situation where one of them had an injury or something happened and couldn't be there, Nick told me that Bobby was so talented that he could step in there as a replacement for either of them on any given night and deliver in the ring with the fans that would never skip a beat, and the fans would never be disappointed. He was so talented in so many areas on so many levels. And just I can't say enough. And it was a number of years since I saw Bobby, and I was familiar with all that he'd been through with his health issues. And he was in Charlotte a year ago when I saw him for the first time in years at one of the fan festivals that Greg Price has. And when I had heard that Bobby, because a lot of times something happens and he's not able to get his flight, not able to be there, and I was told, Bobby is here, he's in that next room. And I was remembering trying to collect my thoughts that, what am I going to say to him? How, he's been through hell, and what do you say? He said, "Oh, Bobby, you look great," what do you say to somebody who's been through what he's been through, for somebody that's the best at what you do? And I remember the room was full of people, and I looked and I made eye contact with Bobby from halfway across the room, and the joy that I was anticipating, I looked into his face, and his eyes lit up, and he waved like a young kid, "Come over here, come over here, come over here," and he stood up and he hugged me, and it's like, oh my God, it just, and I sat there, and sometimes it's very difficult to understand him, because he can't speak but Cindy, his wife, was there with him, and of course she's with him every day and is able to immediately understand what he's trying to say. And a lot of times she'll say, "Well, Bobby's saying," and so I was able to sit there and have a wonderful conversation with him. It was so good to see him, and it just is the fact that all the adversity that he's been through, that and he's got a couple grandchildren. I think that's a big part of what keeps him going, is a love for his grandchildren. But he, you look at him, and he had a picture in his wallet, and he said, And his wife said he wants to show you a picture. He's got a picture as well of his pride and joy. And I'm thinking, oh, he's going to show me one of his grandchildren. He pulled out a picture, and it was a can of pride and a thing of joy dishwashing detergent. And Bobby laughed, and so he just he's never lost that sense of humor.
Oh my gosh! Again, truly, I find that ironic that he was gifted with the gift of gab, only to have it taken away with these throat cancer. But still, the Bobby Heenan still has that zing that he had 30 years ago. That is truly a testament to that wrestling does keep us young at heart and young in mind.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, just to hear the story, as you were telling it, to hear the emotion in your voice, you could see how much it means, that there's that connection there from the long roads, and everybody has their story, and Bobby Heenan also a WWE Hall of Famer. So let's touch on that for a second. Just if you could try and put us in your mind on March 31st when you walked out there and you were, basically cemented that here's your place. It was already prepared for you. Everybody knew it was coming, but to finally get there, what was that like?
Well, in order to really appreciate, the roller coaster of emotions that I went through, there's a whole chapter in my book that's devoted to the time that I spent almost a little over 7.5 years working in the front office after I had walked off camera, and it was, the job that was offered to me for, utilizing my organizational skills, my creative side of being what have you, and not as a talent. And because I started late, at that point, it was a great opportunity. I'd started with Vince's father, so here I was being recruited by his son, and the place that everybody wanted to be. And here they've sent an overture to me, and all of the matchmaking, all of the writing of television, the pay-per-views, I think there were only 5 major pay-per-views at that point, was all being done with Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson, and they were looking for help, and some people threw my name out there, and I was offered a job. So when you talk about McMahon to McMahon, that's the whole spectrum of my career. And I went up there, and like I say, I had children late in life, and Vince is not the easiest guy to work with at times. And when I had children, I had to balance my responsibilities in life. And anyway, long story short, and it's documented in my book, I made a personal decision because of some factors that I talk about in more detail to resign from what everybody thought was the dream job. I was the right-hand man to Vince McMahon. I was vice president of talent relations, which is the job that John Laurinaitis has now, and Jim Ross had it before him, and Pat Patterson had it prior to me. And I walked in there on a Friday and handed Vince out of the blue with no warning a letter of resignation, walked out the door, and Shane, his son, was being married the next day. So you can imagine the turmoil that cost, not knowing if I was a loose cannon, what I was going to do. So that is kind of the history of the relationship. I walked out the door and basically, for the next 10 years anyway, had no contact with Vince McMahon, nothing. And the first hint was after many years when they released the Ric Flair with the Four Horsemen DVD, and a producer called me and said, we want to tell the story, and you were such an integral part of it, and would I be willing to do it? And absolutely, I owed it to the other guys, and I owed it to the fans who made us what we were. And so I was living in Delaware, and they sent a crew to my home and recorded about 6 hours worth of stuff, and that was part of the Horseman DVD. Another year goes by, and I get a call after all those years from Howard Finkel, who I knew very well when I was there, and it was as Flair and Shawn Michaels were meeting at WrestleMania, what looked like it was going to be Flair's final match, and they wanted to have a tribute the next day or all, and they said, would you be willing to come down here? And along with Tully, because Barry was already a backstage agent, which Arn was as well, and this was like a Wednesday before WrestleMania. And I said, yes, of course I would. And they said, well, it's just talking stages now. So I get a call back the next day, yes, we want you to come down. And so I was actually on a plane when WrestleMania was taking place live, and now I'm in the arena. Vince is there after all those years. And so you're looking at, that's 4 years ago, and I left there in 96, so you can do the math. And was there all day, and it was only about 20 minutes before they went off air where we went out there, and we were the first to be introduced to surprise Vince, to surprise Ric Flair. And there's a very small trailer that you go through where there's monitors, and Vince sits there, and a couple of other agents, and Stephanie was there. Anyway, you're very crowded as all these people were being set up to go out. We were the first, and Vince saw Tully, who happened to be right in front of me, stood up, took his headset off, and extended his hand, and I was over Tully's shoulder, and Vince saw me, made eye contact, and reached his hand around and said, JJ, thanks for coming. And I said, Vince, thanks for inviting me, and walked out, didn't see him after. So that were the only words that we had. And then again, a year or two went by, and they were doing the Legends of Wrestling Roundtable session, and one of the sessions was about managers, and another producer who knew the producer from the original Four Horsemen thing called me and said, boy, you'd be a natural for this. Would you come up to our studios and participate in this panel? And so now I'm going up there, and never saw Vince through all of this. So now, fast forward to this year, if I was taking Las Vegas odds on the likelihood, knowing the history, that anything would ever happen in terms of recognition with the WWE, let alone Hall of Fame, I mean, it just seemed like that was something that would. I mean, I would have said the same thing about Bret Hart after the episode that he had with Vince after the thing in Montreal, and even though he spit in Vince's face and punched him in the eye backstage, they eventually got together and did business again. So the odds might have been greater in that situation. I don't know.
I've said it before, Mr. Dillon, I've said it 1,000 times. If anyone in the business deserves to be in that Hall of Fame, it's the Four Horsemen.
What's amazing here is here's Flair, who's the first to be inducted twice in the Hall of Fame. That's a first. And the fact that at the time he was under contract to a competing organization, that would have been something that would have been unheard of not that many years ago. And then here's Barry Windham, who's now the son of a Hall of Famer. There were so many unique things, so many firsts about that night, and you know, with the Horsemen. And yes, it's almost 25 years later, but it's just hard to explain. And then, as if that wasn't special enough, the next day, and I hadn't been to a WrestleMania in 16 years, and I went to Sun Life Stadium, and after the Hell in a Cell match, they had a thing as part of the WrestleMania pay-per-view where they, again, Howard Finkel announced the inductees for that year, and they're showing some video stuff, and then all of a sudden, all of us came out, and we're across the stage, and now you're looking at 78,000 people in this jam-packed stadium. And, of course, you know, it's all of us, not just the Horsemen. I mean, there's Edge out there, and there was Ron Simmons and Emil Mascaras and the family of Yokozuna and Iron Mike Tyson. But still, the high the night before was one thing, and here's a high of a different kind. If I look at that weekend, the whole weekend was surreal, and if I had a magic wand and could wish, well, I wish this, I wish this, I wish this. And, you know, the comments of the current stars, Stone Cold Steve Austin said something about me as a manager. What kind of, you know, to get that kind of star power as a testimonial to the package that they're put together before you're introduced, and then to be introduced in what is now the largest grossing wrestling event in professional wrestling history. That event in Miami. And the next part was on a Monday. They're showing a 1-hour special, which the whole Hall of Fame thing was like 3 hours in duration. And I think, well, it would be nice because that's going out over the networks. They're going to be seen all over the world. And it ended up, it was the Horsemen, it was Tyson that you understand, and it was Edge that you understand. That we got like 20 minutes of that show. So you talk about a magic wand and being able to orchestrate a perfect weekend. I mean, it probably was a week after I came home that I was still trying to process what an unbelievable experience that had been.
It had to have been possibly one of the greatest Hall of Fame ceremonies I've seen in my entire life. I've seen a whole bunch of them, and just the outpour. These are our young fans knowing who the Horsemen are, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The Horsemen are possibly the greatest, if not the greatest group to ever hit professional wrestling. And it only makes you wonder what would have happened if the Four Horsemen had came to WWE during the late 80s and the 90s.
You don't know. And really, they did a nice job of what was actually about a 40-minute thing with all of our comments edited down, which wasn't even 20 minutes because there was, commercials in there and what have you. But they just released the WrestleMania DVD set, and it's a 2-disc set. In the Blu-ray version, I looked on the back, and it said total content time 9 hours. And it's the entire WrestleMania event, and disc number 2 is the entire Hall of Fame ceremony, all 3 hours in high definition, with all of our comments. I introduced my children, Tully introduced his children, Arn introduced it. I mean, and so here, and it's, of course, their biggest selling DVD release every year, and this one, who knows what it's going to do if the event itself was the largest grossing event in wrestling history. I have no idea how many people are going to buy that thing or see it or look at it, and here is our ceremony in its entirety preserved on that disc, and I've already looked at it, and it's kind of like, here it is, preserved forever and ever, kind of like my life story or my book.
Or this interview. Yeah. You guys can get the WrestleMania 28 DVD, either the 3 DVD pack normal or the 2 DVD pack Blu-ray, available at many fine DVD retailers, including Target, FYE, Sam's, Meijer, all those good areas. We may even have to give a copy away on the show, just because the Hall of Fame is truly epic. It's not. There's no epic fail in this one. This is epic.
This was the best attended Hall of Fame, and again, it's hard to believe that that's been 20 years from when they first, decided the concept as a tribute to Andre the Giant after he passed away, and it started very modestly as just a small conference room in the Marriott Marquis in downtown Manhattan, and a few handful of people with tuxedos to induct people, and now it's become a separate event, and you got 78,000 people outdoors at that stadium on a Sunday, and the night before, we're indoors in the arena that those people paid for a separate ticket just to come to be part of that experience. And I mean, it's from a marketing standpoint, it's a win-win situation. It's a wonderful thing for us as people who are in the business to get that recognition, and on the other side, they're making money off it too. Just the fact that the people and their fan access thing and I never even got over there to see that, but they said over at the Miami Beach Convention Center was full with all the autograph sessions and memorabilia that they've had. They have fine-tuned WrestleMania and we went over earlier that day for a little bit of a walkthrough thing, and there was some, they do everything to go through it in preparation. And there's a couple of cameramen there, and somebody said to him, what's this like, you work everything that comes through here. I would assume they say, oh yes, everything that comes to town. We shoot it. And they said, I'll tell you this. They said we've done all the Super Bowls, and the Super Bowl is really a 20-minute concert in the middle of a football game. And for that 20 minutes, it's pretty exciting. But they said tonight will be a non-stop 3-hour entertainment spectacular, and nothing in the entertainment world compares to it. And they were right. It was, starting from the girl that sings, America's Beauty. God, what a beautiful voice she has, Garcia. And then the flyover with the two jets. And I was looking and was standing what was outside the Marlins dugout behind the bleachers, and I could see the screens above, and I could hear her, singing, and they had all the soldiery with flags across the stage, and it was, very, and there was a National Guardsman there, and I said, where's the flyover? We're gonna not want to miss it. They wouldn't have that here. Oh, okay. And I had heard there was going to be, and I just happened to be looking up, and here come these two jets where their afterburners going, and they look low to me, and you could see on the DVD, they actually had a shot, but I saw the jets right as and just that fast they're gone, and the noise as they went out of sight was boom, and it was so loud I physically ducked. And I felt stupid because I actually saw the jets, saw them pass by. What am I ducking from? But the noise is that great when you're on the ground under them, and it just the whole event. And they built a year for The Rock and Cena. How do you have a match that you built up for a year, and how do you live up to that hype? And they did. And then the Hell in a Cell match with The Undertaker and Triple H with Shawn Michaels, to me, stole the show. And Tully and I watched it, and our comment was the same, that we have watched throughout our careers some memorable matches and been involved in a lot of them. And both of us felt that night, that match might have been the greatest match we'd ever seen.
Well, yeah, Kris has been to several WrestleMania himself, haven't you, Kris?
Yes, I have. Like I said, your one question was always, "What's it like?" I'm just there as a fan, and it's a spectacle. So I can only imagine, reaching that point, not only knowing that you're there, but knowing that this is, you're going to get your moment out there of, hey, here they are. Here are our Hall of Famers. Yeah,
and to have your family there to share that moment, it doesn't get any better. And like I said, 3 of my children came into the world after I had retired from the ring, and they would hear me do interviews, and my son's sitting here with me now because school just ended, and he's sitting here, and he's heard me do I don't know how many interviews over the phone, and and he's watched some things on YouTube and what have you, but to actually be there and to see the, I guess, validation, for lack of a better word, of what you did for so much of your adult life, and here's the stars of today and the stars of yesterday, and just validating what you accomplished and getting that recognition. And there are people that say, well, it's looking at the Hall of Fame and how it's come about and what it really is, but to the average wrestling fan, that is the Hall of Fame in their eyes. And whether it ever becomes a brick-and-mortar building. And there is another professional wrestling Hall of Fame up in Amsterdam, New York, that I strongly support, and I'm not there yet. And I've been going to their ceremony the last 7 years, and this was, I think, the 11th year this year, and I'm on the board of directors. And there is a process, much like the Baseball Hall of Fame, for people that get elected. Jim Cornette won in this year, and he rightfully deserves to be there. And so you could look at the process of Bruno Sammartino came this year, 10 years after he was inducted, to actually get his ring. And so that's very emotional, but, it's apples and oranges, but how how do you put into words, what I experienced in Miami, and it just there aren't very many times in my life that I'm at a loss for words, and with this one, I kind of am. It just, and if you look at the list of names of people, and you look and say, well, this, and you can say the thing about the Baseball Hall of Fame. There's people that, the question how this guy got here because somebody lobbied for him or whatever. But when your name is being mentioned on the same list with Gorgeous George, with Hulk Hogan, with all the legends from the past, Andre the Giant, and your name is being mentioned in the same sentence with these people, that's very humbling.
Well, Mr. Dillon, you said you were on the board of directors for the Hall of Fame. Boy, have we got a recommendation for you. Now, we come from Norwood, Ohio, and from Norwood, Ohio was a wrestler that we feel really, 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 really deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Kris, why don't you take over from here?
Well, you can get off your knees for begging now, and I think Denny would like. We would like to plug just that if you could ever mention Brian Pillman.
Oh, wow.
In a sentence, we'd appreciate it.
Yes, Brian Pillman was a Norwood-born native. He got his start, in the Cincinnati Bengals. He had a small run there. Then he went over to WCW and tag teamed with Steve Austin and made the Hollywood Blondes, a very popular tag team. And then, of course, came over to the WWE, where he would become the loose cannon Brian Pillman, and even had the infamous Brian's Got a Gun segment.
Just saying, grew up in the house right next to my grandma and my father.
Again, we talk about the Horsemen being ahead of times and being innovators and paving the way for other people. Brian Pillman was an innovator. He was ahead of his time too, and tragic that that we lost him. When we did, but I had a chance to be around Brian and to get to know him, and saw him with what he went through, with his accident. He was a great guy. He really, really was, and certainly worthy of what's happening, because the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame this was only their 11th induction. They're now, little by little, because each year they only bring two from one year, one tag team, what have you. So there's a lot of worthy people that are just now getting the recognition that, they had to wait their turn, kind of thing. And so, the worthy, I look at it this way because of the legitimacy of the selection process, and you go on their website and see how it's structured.
Oh, definitely.
The people that are worthy in time will get there.
Exactly. Then that's the thing. You gotta take it as it comes, and it'll get there. My 2-year-old daughter, my daughter Cadence, she actually, I make her watch. I don't make her watch anymore. She watches now on her own. We watched the Hall of Fame when I got the WrestleMania disc, and she knows all about it. And hopefully one day I'll be able to explain to her, that actually a famous professional wrestler, maybe by that time a Hall of Famer, Brian Pillman, just grew up right next to her great-grandma.
Yeah.
Went to the same high school that we went to, got honored in the Athletic Hall of Fame at that school. Yeah, again, a great former on the Bengals and a big wrestling icon, and maybe we'd like to see who's getting into the Hall of Fame. Maybe a little.
Hey, there is a legitimate process, but also there are people who speak highly of certain people and feel that they're worthy, that their voice creates awareness, because there are so many people out there, and the committee, there's a selection committee each year, and the committee changes from year to year, and the body of voters changes from year to year. So it doesn't hurt to have people say, that I think, this individual or that individual is worthy of consideration, and over time, I think that attention, help that creation of awareness may speed up the processes. But if they're worthy of getting in, that will like I say, hopefully speed up the process.
Well, maybe we can get a little YouTube audience to help us out there. Maybe put a little hat reference there, help get Brad Pillman in the Hall of Fame. Maybe put a little, maybe get a little incentive your way, Mr. Dillon. Maybe a little Hall of Fame there. Can I know who's got it? Brad Pillman. Sorry.
I mean, it's just one of those things. Never did I ever think that I would sit here and talk to one of the greatest managers of all time. We've certainly I've had a blast. Dennis, how about yourself?
I've had a great time, but Mr. Dillon, before we go, we've got one listener question that I have to ask. I don't know if you know this, but there's a guy out there named Matthew. He does this thing called Botchamania, and he's a good friend of mine. I told him about having you on the show. He told me he had to have one question asked, and here's his question. You are a effing legend, and my question is, with all you've done for professional wrestling, how can you remain so humble?
It just, because I was a fan and because, there's a lot of people who, and I have seen it, who get into the business and enjoy some success, and all of a sudden, well, I am where I am because, I'm really great. And I realized from the very beginning how lucky I was, and that how much of it was, yes, hard work, perseverance, but a lot of it too, like I say, luck, being in the right place at the right time, and the people that helped me along the way. And I just never got wrapped up in how much of it was really me. And every interview that I've ever done, and this one included, that I never hesitate to use the opportunity to thank the fans, because without the fans, there would have been no J.J. Dillon, there would have been no Four Horsemen, there would have been no professional wrestling. The wrestling fans are the greatest fans in the world. They're the most loyal. When they like you, they let you know it, and when they don't like you, they let you know it too. And I realized that a great part of the success that I've enjoyed is the fact that the fans were the ones that really ultimately created it. And so for me personally, and maybe it's my makeup, my personality, I'm very thankful. And if that translates into humility, then okay, maybe I am a humble guy. But just thankful that I live where I live in this country, that I could have a dream and chase the dream, and that so many steps enabled me to get where I am. And it's kind of like the week after all of this in Miami, being able to look back and say, wow, I enjoyed a storybook career, but Hall of Fame recognition, it goes beyond that. It transcends that. It's something that you don't even dare to dream about, something like that. And to know that it actually happened. And I got a nice letter in the mail 2 weeks after from John Laurinaitis, and he, in the letter, thanked me for being there, for my participation in that weekend. And then he said in the letter, he said, and you will now and forever be known as a Hall of Famer.
Which is the stamp on everything that you've done. Is the Hall of Famer. I think and especially now it seems like wrestling is a secular passion. You're seeing more fans come out. There's more ceremonies, but nothing matches the Hall of Fame. You have friends.
And because of DVDs, because of the various forms of media that didn't exist years ago, YouTube. I mean, those things that are out there. One day somebody said to me, "Have you ever done a Google search for J.J. Dillon and just see what comes up?" I said, "No." And you go on there, and there was 2 2.5 million hits or something, and and some of them are kind of remote, and there might be some duplication. But just the thought that there is all that out there that's there forever for consumption by anybody and everybody that has access to it. So, I mean, there's a whole generation of people who are being exposed, and there are a lot of people who are not enamored with the current product that look at what we did 25 years ago and are entertained by it today, and see the simplicity of what was going on. That you didn't need to be a rocket scientist. You didn't need somebody to explain it to you step by step. That it was just there for you to digest. And we took great pride in everything that we did. I mean, Arn, and you heard it from Arn, and you heard it from Tully at the Hall of Fame thing, and it was like, and you guys pointed it out earlier, that I think one of the things that made the Horsemen unique was that everybody already had made their stamp on the business, and it just happened to be the chemistry among the 4 or 5 with me that was just a genuine enjoyment of the time together. And certainly in the beginning, nobody could have ever realized how big it would become, or that it would last as long as it did. And we just had something that was very special, and there was maybe a subtle competition among each of us, that we weren't all in the same match every night. And when guys would go out there was that internal pride that said, okay, you go out there and you leave it all out there, and it's okay, follow that one. And each time the guy went out, they set the bar a little bit higher, and the fans, with the passing of time, knew that was the expectation. When one or more of the Horsemen are out there, and when we're all out there in a war game together, the expectation hit its highest level. And we went out there, and it didn't matter if we were in a small town or if we were in a major arena. It was the same work ethic. It didn't matter, and that's what set Flair apart. He went out there. There were no shortcuts. There were no, the house didn't do as well as everybody thought it would for whatever the reason, so we're not going to go out and kill ourselves tonight. That wasn't even part of the thought process. So because of YouTube, because of the DVDs, because of the 24-hour channel that the WWE has, and that they bought up all the footage, and there are people who say, I watched you on, Georgia Championship Wrestling or Championship Wrestling from Florida, or old tapes from the Carolinas. So there's whole new generations that are being exposed to what we did that, in the absence of that, we might have been a forgotten entity. I don't know.
I mean, definitely, YouTube and everything has it. You're starting to see the renaissance. People aren't afraid to wear wrestling T-shirts anymore out in public. It used to be something that, we went through a phase where people tried to hide that they were wrestling fans. Now, because of WWE's global market and everything, you have people on the internet like that start their own businesses because of the wrestling business. Basically, you have people like my good friends at youcan'tteame.com who run wrestling shirts now because people aren't afraid to be wrestling fans anymore, which I think is the greatest thing. I mean, I've never been afraid to be a wrestling fan, but and
it's like Loki said the first time he went to Japan, that was the sentiment. And then you look at old black and white from years and years ago, and you look at the audience, you'll see people, most of the men are wearing a jacket and tie, and women are dressed up. And it's at its highest level. I always said that 2 points. Johnny Valentine was one of the first people that drew me to the business. He took him a long while to get over. Once he got over, wow, he was something else. And he used to say, I can't make people believe that wrestling is real, but I can convince them that I'm for real. And he did. And he made you a believer. And professional wrestling is an art form. And when it's performed at its absolute highest level, fans can have a preconceived notion of what they're going to watch. You know, a parent takes his kid because, my kid likes to watch it, I'm going to go too. And then the next thing you know, they're emotionally involved and they're coming over the rail trying to get in the ring. And you know, who knows what they think when they go home that night at the end of the day. But performed at its highest level, it looks so real that it becomes real. And that's a great compliment when you can perform at that level, that you bring that kind of emotion out of people. And that's what we attempted to do, and that's what we took great pride in accomplishing.
Well, Mr. Dillon, all I got to say is thank you so much for being on the show. Guys, check out jjdillon.com. Check out his new book, Wrestlers Are Like Seagulls, From McMahon to McMahon. Check him out in Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen, which you can get at www.shop.com, along with the WrestleMania 28 DVD package, which includes the full, unabridged Hall of Fame ceremony. This is stuff that you are not going to see anywhere else. And Mr. Dillon, I got to say thank you so much for being on the show. This was truly a huge honor. And I hope that when the history's pages are written in the Book of Life, the Four Horsemen will have a huge chapter.
Well, I thank you guys. The time is just just flown by, and like I say, you've asked the good questions, and Dennis and Kris, I've really enjoyed the time being with you, and I appreciate having me on.
Well, folks, we're going to be cutting out here right now. This is the Dennis Daniels Show. Until next time, good night, Nate.